Um, right, so in Greek heroine cults, Jennifer Larson argues that there's gender symmetry here as well, in the incorporation of the narrative of Heracles and the narrative of Ino within the Odyssey. And what she notices is that both of these figures, Heracles and Ino, in the ancient world were worshipped as both heroes and gods. So both Heracles and Ino received cult honors as heroes, and both Heracles and Ino were worshipped as gods. And this kind of makes them somewhat unique. That's not the most, typical thing that you'll see. But what she notices also is in this narrative, where it's Odysseus telling his story to the Phaeacians, he mentions, so we have to remember that this is all Odysseus's speech. Odysseus says, I saw Heracles, and he was the husband of, actually, I didn't see him, he says. I saw his phantom. In Greek, the word is eidolon. And you'll recognize the word eidolon possibly because it's applied to Helen as well, that it was never Helen who went to Troy. We're told in some versions of the myth, it was actually her eidolon. It was just a sort of, to use Verity's translation, this is Verity, to use his translation, a phantom. It was just a kind of pretend Helen to mark the space. But Helen herself was actually away in Egypt. And that's what Odysseus says about Heracles here. He says, I saw his eidolon. He himself, autos is, I think, what it says in Greek. He himself was with the gods feasting, and his wife was Hebe. And this is really interesting because you have the daughter of great Zeus and Hera of the golden sandals. Again, that's how Verity translates it. In Greek, it says Paida. There's no article, so you don't know who's the child of Zeus and Hera. Is it Heracles or is it Hebe? And we know Hebe is. And we might think to ourselves, well, of course it can't be Heracles because his mother wasn't Hera. But there is an alternate myth that says Heracles is the son, he's born again after his immortalization through Hera, and they are reconciled. So is this maybe making a reference to that? And again, these are really complicated issues, and maybe we don't really want to engage with them because we don't know what to do with them. How do we reconcile all these different variations, and why do they exist, and are they important, and what is Homer? Maybe Homer doesn't mean that at all, and of course we don't really know. But we do know that that story is told to us by the bard himself, herself, whoever, by the bard. And the bard tells us that the daughter of Cadmus, again, there's that, that's her father's name. I know her name. The luminous goddess is how I describe it. It's leukotheia in Greek. Leuko, again, is this a quality of light? Like, what exactly is this? Does this refer to the moment of her immortalization when Zeus maybe sends a thunderbolt as she kind of throws, what narrative is this referring to? Who knows? But the point is, then, she is now, right, she was mortal, but now she's a goddess of the sea. So now she's immortal. So obviously we can supplement in that at some point she died, right? So there's that traditional hero arc, right? She was born, she lived as a mortal, she died, and then she was immortalized. And I think what's also really interesting here is she felt pity for Odysseus wandering and suffering. And basically what Odysseus tells us about Heracles is he wandered a lot and he suffered. He felt bad for me. Heracles identified with me. And in this moment, and we might question this because this is Odysseus speaking, and we know Odysseus, likes to kind of sell himself, right? He knows how to tell a story. He knows how to tell. But this is actually the bard telling us that Ino saw him and empathized with him. And I think what's really important is also that she helps him. Right? She decides she's going to help him on his journey. Why are you being hounded? I feel bad for you. Here, take my immortal veil. So we get this kind of paradigm that heroes can identify with veils they've had in the myth world. They can identify with them. They've had similar experiences. And then because they've had similar experiences and because they identify with them, if they're feeling benevolent, they can protect you and help you. And so it pays, right, to be proper, to be correct in the way that you engage with superhuman forces. Right? In this, we're told she's a goddess, but there might be more to it than that, right? Potentially. And so that's kind of in Homer, even though he's never actually saying, Ina was a person who was worshipped, and here was her cult. Her cult was in this city and this place and that place. He doesn't tell us any of that. In this place, she was worshipped as a goddess. None of that is of interest to Homer. What Homer's interested in is this dynamic, right? There's a journey, there's an arc, and you can tap into it, you can connect to it, you can invoke the power of the hero. And these are the two, I've put heroine, usually it's described hero, but I think we can sort of say that it's what you're famous for might be different. We certainly can now start to understand that heroines are figures who are worshipped in the ancient Greek world. They have cults, they receive honors. They might be different in different communities, but they are heroines. And so typically these two things were seen as separate. There's the hero of myth, and then there's the hero of cult. Those two things are not related. I hope that that I've convinced you that maybe they might be more related than we think. But the heroine of myth, what Naj, who was the first to argue for a connection between myth and cult, and he defines Greek religion as an interconnection between myth and cult, in fact. And what he says about the heroine of myth is that the heroine or hero of myth is basically the story and the character in the story. And they're celebrated for heroic actions and exploits. And what this means, whether it's even a good thing or a bad thing, is something that's being debated very early. And of course, this is also pan-Hellenic, meaning that it's a tradition shared among Greek city-states, that it holds broader significance and cultural meaning beyond just being the expression of an individual poet. So what Homer's doing, we think of him like, it's Homer, it's the man, Homer, but there's more to it than just that, right? It's giving you a kind of paradigm that you can tap into, no matter where you are. But the heroines and heroes of cult are associated with specific places. So when Homer's talking about Ino, he's talking broadly, right? This powerful figure, this heroine. He doesn't use that word, he uses goddess, but nevertheless, right? But if you're in a particular city-state, right, you're in Athens, your Helen is going to be different. You're worshiping a different Helen than the people who are in, than the Helen that's worshipped in Sparta or even in Rhodes, right? And different stories will be told about her. So, and those stories will depend very much on the meaning that the community invests this figure with. Can I ask if there are any questions at this point? Does this make sense? Yeah. As I mentioned, Naj was the first to argue for a connection between myth and cult, and these are just some of the things that he, right, it's just a few. This is the entire list of things he says about hero cult. I want to pick out three. Details about ritual and myth around the hero cult were sacred and thus secret, only for those initiated into the cult. And I think that kind of can help us understand why the pan-Hellenic myths are not going to give us any details, because that's not their job. That's not what they're there for. And then the next thing that's really important, the hero is dead in the physical world, but immortalized in the paradise-like place. Elysium, it goes by different names, Elysium, Islands of the Blessed, White Island. And we get a glimpse of that through the narrative of Heracles and the Odyssey, right? We know, right, we have a sense that Heracles is, the Eidolon is in Hades, so some imprint of his mortal identity is in this transitional Hades space, but he himself is immortalized among the gods. And then the last one that I think is also really important, and again, just to remind you, we are trying to understand Kleos, right? We're trying to understand a social kind of fame, like a fame that can only exist through the social world, through the social dimension. The heroes could return to life among their worshippers. At the moment of worship, when the sacred cult area became notionally identical to the paradise-like residence of the hero. And then there's other things we know about we think we know about hero worship, which is that their precinct would have been in some kind of cultivated space. So think about the bedroom of Penelope and Odysseus, for example, has a living tree in it. So in a sense, right, it's being coded as a cultivated space, even in Homer. But for now, I think I really want us to stay. What does this mean? The hero could return to life among the worshipers at the moment of worship. And so here we could just think about what Naj says about oral poetry and composition, and what does a word mean? What is it? How does a word function in oral tradition? Well, the idea is that the word and the action, right? To speak is to act, right? When you speak, you activate, you make something real. And so even, right, if you're familiar with the New Testament, right, there's the word, right? God, right? God made the word, or God is the logos, right? And we translate it as word, but it's logos isn't quite word, is it? So again, we have a little problem, which is that our concepts aren't, our language isn't big enough to hold these concepts, right? In some ways, like we kind of streamline things, and by streamlining things, sometimes we lose a little bit of the nuance. So the key thing that I just, again, want to point to is oral tradition. The word is like the verbal art is part of the ritual. And it's in speaking the hero's name that we're, again, invoking the hero. We're bringing the hero into the present. And by bringing the hero into the present, we bring ourselves into eternity, right? That's the idea behind it, is we're going to come and we're going to tell we're going to incorporate this story. And of course, there's a lot of other things in the ritual as well, but by speaking the hero's name, we're making the hero real in this moment and implicating ourselves in this eternal line of song. Some other things we should notice is that hero cults and epic come at the same rate, arise at the same time. So it's convenient, isn't it, right? Like epic and hero cults. And which comes first is, I think, the chicken and the egg conversation, right? Which comes first, the chicken or the egg? And I really think I think Emily Kearns is really helpful. If we're puzzled as to what a hero actually is, it seems that the Greeks of the classical period were equally puzzled, but we can slightly firmer ground as far as what did they do for the hero. And then sometimes this can help us understand what what the hero means. And then Naj points out that the divine ancestry of the hero is more prominent in narrative than it is in cult. It's a little more subtle and focused on their local power in cult. So just a few things, again, to round out our understanding of those two passages at the beginning and what they're kind of indicating to us potentially about heroes. And returning to this question of why has the concept of the heroine been questioned in Homer, I think there are some, real reasons. It's not just like, well, everyone hates women, right? I don't think it's quite that simple. I mentioned that it's the 8th century, but it's not until Pindar in the early, I think around 475-ish, earliest potential date, that we see a feminine version of the word hero. And the other thing that Lyons points out is that there's no form of the word that prevails. And so there's different ways that the word is described. And this might say to us, well, maybe they only think of them as heroines locally. Maybe they're not considered heroic in Homer. That's the argument that has been made. And then some people have questioned whether there's even a difference between heroines and goddesses, and suggested that maybe they're really just one and the same. But Lyons emphasizes that they are different in the way that they're worshipped. So Greek religion is recognizing a difference in how heroines are worshipped and how goddesses are worshipped. So important. Of course, Finley makes that kind of argument from silence. Well, since there's no feminine form of the word eros, then they must not exist there. But of course, arguments from silence are, a little tricky, because that's just what we can see. We don't really know what's going on, right? We just have this text that has survived. We don't really know what's going on beyond that. And that's kind of what people have said. Well, we do have heroines in history, in the historical times, so they must have recognized it in Homer also. seem to provide a kind of working definition of heroines as wives, daughters, or mothers of heroes. And there's a very interesting like side road that we could go down about Pandora and the 5 ages of man from Hesiod, and how is he kind of conceptualizing the creation of the heroic of each heroic age. But we'll simply kind of stay for that since I can't keep you here forever. I do, again, Greeks found nothing odd about cult heroines, and Larson's book, Greek Heroine Cults, is a wonderful kind of introduction to them. One thing that she says is our expectations are shaped by an ethos of individual male achievement in Homeric epic. And she does point out that a very small percentage of heroic cults are actually dedicated to Homeric figures, that we have many, many more heroes, right? So Homer's clearly not trying to catalog everything. It's not the individuals that he's cataloging, it's the paradigm. But this is what I find interesting, the ethos of individual male achievement in Homeric epic, and that's the second half of this presentation. I wonder if it's us who kind of impose this idea of heroism onto Homer, that it's just men working alone to get glory for themselves. I question that. I think that's more us than it is Homer. And that's what I want to look at for the second half. Any thoughts or questions? I just dislike talking and talking without anybody hearing from anyone else. Okay. So quickly, this, I put as a reference for anybody who's interested to read that earliest reference to heroine. Pythian 11, you can just keep that in your mind. We also, as we're going to go into, right, you might have noticed in my title, the word daimoni. This is the word that I think is most telling for me. But I just want to go over quickly, right, we have heroes and hero, whatever the feminine version is that's being used. And one of the suggestions is that this is all speculative, right? We can't claim 100% certainty. But one of the theories is that the root of this word is also connected to time, ora, and hera, ira. And so the hero is sort of this seasonal figure, and that melds very much into cult. Right, cult is a seasonally recurring. So it's not living forever like you just live forever. It's you live forever through this cycle of recurrence. And then Naj also points out the use of the word aristos and ariste, and you've kind of seen a little bit of that already, where we said like the first among, like the best among. So that idea of firstness or bestness, Naj says he believes it's a functional equivalent of hero in Homer because it is the firstness is the defining characteristic of the hero. So it's not that it's Achilles is the best, the swift-footed, the best warrior, right? But we have other heroes too. We have Calchas, who's the best at interpreting omens. We have Odysseus, who's the best at speaking. We have Agamemnon, who is, believe it or not, the leader, right? Well, we could have a lot of fun with that, but at any rate, that firstness is what characterizes the hero. And so for Naj, Aristos or Ariste is a functional equivalent of a hero. And then we have the word demon, which Naj broadly defines as superhuman force. And he specifies, as I'll point out again, that this demon could be a god or it could be a hero, in particular when that figure, that force, is intervening in human affairs or human events. And so basically, just again, some different scholars you could look at if you wanted to study this further, different versions of different ways of understanding the hero, always, again, as a religious figure. And if we think about the hero as a religious figure, not just a character in a story for our entertainment, but a character in a story that's teaching us about our religion in archaic and classical times, then we're going to think about heroines a little bit differently, I think. And we can't, I should point out, map all of these different ways of thinking specifically. It's not a one-to-one correspondence. But I'll just point out a few things about three main heroines that I want to focus on, which is Helen. And what we what we have about Helen, we have her interacting. Well, she's found weaving when Iris comes to get her. Aphrodite says, "Come get Helen. Go get Helen and bring her to the wall so she can watch this duel between her two husbands." Right. So she's weaving, and what is she weaving? A dark, gleaming, double-folded mantle. And the idea of the word in Greek gives you this sense of something turbulent, right? Something troubled. It's sometimes used to describe like troubled waters. So she's there, and what is she weaving onto this cloth but the story of the war? And so we kind of get this image of her as the author of the Trojan War, the occasion for the war. And we would say, right, like we might think of it in terms of cause, like as blame, but I think in Homer, again, it's the occasion, right? Why are the Achaeans and the Trojans battling? They're battling to take Helen, to take possession of Helen. And even as they're doing that, right, she is kind of controlling the narrative. And it's very interesting that at the very end of the Iliad, when we get the three laments for Hector, Helen gives the last one. And I just want you to remember that Helen gives the last one. And when she gives it, weeping, right, there's that speech and response, the call and response. It's the boundless people bursting forth their grief, and boundless with the sense of like endless streams of people. So when she finishes her lament, we have this sense that something has been initiated, right? Some song has been initiated that will continue eternally. The other heroine, Andromache, what is her like excellence? What is her firstness? Well, what it seems is grief in some ways, right? Because her grief is so excessive, right? This is Hector, right? This is Hector speaking. He says, "After I'm dead and you're enslaved," which doesn't sit well, right? Like when you're enslaved. But nevertheless, he's when you are weeping, when your grief can't be contained, people will look at you and say, "That's the wife of Hector." He was first in battle among the horse-breaking Trojans whenever they fought around Troy. And again, if our eyes are just on the narrative, then we're thinking, okay, Hector's kind of a jerk. Like, I don't really like him. No, I'm joking. But it seems like he's saying this, you're going to be the vehicle through which I'm remembered, and you're not really all that important. It's really all about me. But again, if we're thinking about this as a paradigm, as some great force that the survivors will hold on to no matter what happens, then it's not just Hector who's being remembered, it's the horse-breaking Trojans, it's the whole civilization. And so civilization isn't surviving because monuments are surviving and even little statues are surviving. Civilization is surviving, a civilization survives because there are people to continue speaking about it, to continue invoking it. And she actually gives the first lament for Hector, and so she spoke weeping and the women wailed in response. And so this kind of initiates, right? If Helen is the end, which is going to go into eternity, it has to start with something. And it starts with all of these women lamenting the loss of their husbands. And if anyone has read Silence of the Girls, I think this is one thing that Pat Barker does really well. She makes you really feel they've been taken into captivity, but they haven't forgotten who they are. And they will pass that knowledge on. And I think that's a powerful, right, element. It's saying you can capture us, but you can't control who we are. And then finally, we have Penelope, who never does get caught, other than how she wants to be. And here's where that word demon comes in. My first witch, a demon, breathed into my consciousness. My first what? Her first scheme. So in this section, in book 19, she's asked the beggar, who is Odysseus in disguise, And there's a big debate. Does she know it's Odysseus in disguise? I say, of course she knows. She knows right away. At any rate, she's sitting telling him a very interesting story, right? She's saying, I had this very clever scheme that I set up, and it was given to me by a demon, by a superhuman force, something. And I survived for 7 years on this scheme. But there is a little thing that she might have made a mistake about, which is she weaved right in the large room, right? So like some scholars have said, oh, she exposed herself. She was not in the inner room weaving, she was in the public space. And by being in the public space, she kind of enables herself to be caught. So like maybe that's a small mistake that happened. Again, always these things are debatable. But then she says that, and if you read it in the Greek, you'll realize that she is repeating exactly what Antinous says about her in book 2. He, at an assembly, he says, Penelope, she had this scheme to hold us off, and a god gave it to her, but it didn't work because we caught her. And Antinous thinks he's very clever, but Antinous probably isn't as clever as he thinks he is, because he says, he says to Telemachus, your mother's Kleos is going to be destroyed because she's not picking one of us as a husband. She just sits there waiting and waiting, and so she's going to lose her Kleos. But Penelope knows and says, my Kleos will be greater if Odysseus returns. So Antinous thinks Penelope's Kleos is isolated individual just based on her scheme, but Penelope understands the scheme isn't just for funsies, right? We're not just trying to trick the suitors because we're bored, right? And we just want to entertain ourselves. We're tricking the suitors because we want to wait to see if Odysseus can get home. And so she understands that her Kleos is social, right, is dependent on something else. And Odysseus also, right, by returning, he's going to show that Penelope really is the best, because he could have had immortality, he could have become a god, but he'd rather go home to Penelope. So that makes her out to be pretty amazing. But similarly, right, his Kleos is enhanced by the fact that Penelope actually helps him get back in control, that she is doing that job. So they're the two perfectly aligned heroes in the Odyssey. Then at the very end, when they are about to have their reunion, Odysseus says to her, Daimoni. And this is where I think it gets really interesting. They call each other Daimoni. So previously, the demon clearly has referred to a god, somebody outside. But in this scene in book 23, right when they have their reunion, he calls her a Daimoni. And I think there's well, we'll see what I think of that. But he says, in you among all women has been given an iron heart by those who dwell on Olympus. Is this a compliment or is this an insult? It seems like he's saying, if you say, this is often translated hard, right? A hard heart. And we'll already think of somebody hard-hearted not being, very nice. But an iron heart, like that's just a really strong, like the strongest possible material. So your heart is made of the strongest possible material. And you're not even, I'm standing here in front of you, Athena has beautified me, that convinced Telemachus, just saying, but you're just sitting there looking at me, right? And what's he doing here? And I think when we think about this word demon, I first want to point out that it's used in 3 very interesting ways. One is when a hero is being compared to a god. So in the Iliad, we have both Diomedes and Patroclus, when they're confronting a god in battle, they're called like Daimoni, equal to a demon. And he quits after his 3rd try, and he lives, and he quits not after he doesn't stop, and he dies. So yeah, probably don't want to push too hard against a superhuman force who's warning you to stop. And then another way that we see this word used is when external event is directly affecting an individual, and this is attributed to a demon. So Antinous complaining that Telemachus came back at the wrong time because meanwhile a demon led him home. Again, Antinous, not the sharpest suitor of the lot, because he thinks a god led him home, but I'm still going to keep trying to kill him, right? Like you'd think he'd kind of match up things, but no. And then Lycaon, right, he blames a demon for putting him in Achilles' path, and then Odysseus says a demon has raised a storm against him. And then we have the power of a demon operating internally upon the individual, and that's the example that I showed you, Penelope with the shroud, and Odysseus's men preparing to blind Polyphemus. Also, a demon kind of breathes courage into them, which is another thing we see a lot, is gods breathing courage. They're not interchangeable. This is a big thing that Burkitt points out. The demon, like that word is used when the speaker doesn't know what's going on necessarily. The speaker isn't in full, doesn't have full knowledge. So when Penelope says a demon put this idea into me, maybe she doesn't know that it's Athena doing it, or maybe she's hiding from the person listening to her that it's Athena doing it, right? Like we don't know for sure. And then a demon is a force that drives men forward where no agent can be named. So the individual feels as if it were the tide, like pushing him, and either he acts with the demon or against it. And yeah. So that's Burkert. And then Naj says that, I think this is really interesting, Daemon is derived from the same root as Daomai, which is divining or apportioning. And so I wonder if when we're using the vocative form of Daimoni, whether we're saying you who is shaping the contours of my fate, right? That could potentially be a way of thinking about it. And just finally, Naj does specify that Daemon is to be contrasted with Theos. Theos is usually used to refer to a specific god. So I did mention this, I think, already. So now if we look at another instance where the vocative of Daemon is used, it's in the scene, you know, everyone's favorite, right? Beautiful scene, very moving, very sad between Andromache and Hector. And in that scene, they call each other Daimoni. And they call each other Daimoni at the moment when they're contesting. Andromache wants Hector to come inside and be safe. She gives him very good advice. It's given to him by Polydamas elsewhere in the poem. And she's saying, your might will despoil you. And again, the verb is the idea of some natural thing withering away and dying. Your might, right? Your excessive might is going to kill you. It's going to destroy you. And she says, who is going to take care of me? Like, who's going to protect me when you're gone? And who's going to protect your son? We're going to have nothing left to us but grief. Right? So there is, again, this intimation of extremely powerful grief. And he says, I just cannot stay back. I can't be the one to be safe. That's not my job. I've got to be first to fight. Right? And he says, don't grieve excessively for me. Fate is going to happen the way it is. And I think this is really interesting. Your might will despoil you. That's true, it does. Do not grieve excessively for me, but she does. And the suggestion is that excessive grief will be the kind of spark of epic, is that first little introduction to it. And the other place where we have two heroes calling each other Daimoni is the scene with Penelope and Odysseus, again, that I gave you that little in you among all women. Again, that's why I spent so much time talking about the language around heroes and heroines, right? Because again, in you among all women, right? You're the one with the strongest heart. Like no, not even a god could bend your will, right? You are determined to preserve this family, this unit. And so he says, my interpretation is when he says to her, give me a bed, that he's activating a agreed upon like code word, right? Because he earlier says to her, and I mean, you don't have to agree, this is just a theory, but because earlier he says to Telemachus also calls his mother iron-hearted, but I don't think he means it as a compliment. And Odysseus says, don't worry about your mother. She and I have our own token. She and I have our own thing that we agree on. And so when he says, bring me a bed, I would argue he's activating the token, right? He's activating the code. And then she says, okay, yeah, take the bed outside. And that's when he says, oh, I can't believe it. And then he launches into 20 lines of description of how the bed was built. And then finally she says, ah, okay. And again, the genius of this is, so by mentioning the bed, she then indicates that she hasn't told the secret to anyone. Because if she had revealed this to anyone, it would be no use to her to hear Odysseus say it, because anybody might know it. And for him to hear, so when he hears her mention the bed, he knows, okay, it's still our code word. And then, of course, since she has never revealed it, his description of how he built it will affirm for her, will confirm that he is who he says he is. Yeah, so quite genius, I think, our Homer. And there's one other place where he calls her Daimoni, and that's at the end of the scene when he says, they tell their stories to each other, and he says, oh, and also I got a really bad prophecy that I really don't want to think about from Tiresias. And she says, no, I think you should tell it to me now. And he says, why are you pushing me? Why are you so pushy? Why do you demand that you hear this now? Oh, well, fine, I'll tell you. And I do think that the whole point of that is this point. He's going to tell her about his future suffering, and it's a story that she's going to hear, right? She says, I'm going to hear it. If you're going to suffer, I'll hear about it. And in a way, right, there's this suggestion elsewhere in the Iliad that it is suffering that is the story that you end up telling. And I think we could probably, I tell many stories about being stuck in New York City traffic, right? Right? We like to tell the stories, right, and make them funny, right? Not the worst, not always the worst suffering, but certainly like dark humor is a thing. In some cultures more than others, right? Morbid humor. But I do think we have this idea that suffering is going to, it's not going to destroy us. It's just going to make us hold on to our identity even more. And we'll be able to carry that on through the way that we speak and the way that we talk and the rituals, of course. And Maria Pantalea is the woman that I mentioned earlier, who talks, a very interesting article, again, for anyone who's interested. She has a wonderful article on the order of the laments and their significance in Homer, again, showing this progression from women grieving in the moment to kind of this implication of eternity in Helen's. And I think we can, of course, Athena, the one who is associated with weaving, and weaving is also associated with song, right? We saw Helen, she's weaving the story of the Trojan War. The story of the Trojan War is also the song, the epic song. And I do love the part where her peplos is described. Many colors could also be translated intricately embroidered. And Elizabeth Whalen Barber suggests that Athena represents everything that human skill and know-how can accomplish. She is goddess of civilization itself. And of course, she's the goddess behind Odysseus and Penelope. So kind of giving us this little hint of what civilization really means. And I do think this is a really interesting, a diagram that Elizabeth Whalen Barber puts in her book of a story cloth that seems to have been repaired and treasured over time. And you can kind of notice a similarity here with friezes, aesthetically, and maybe even pots as well. So yeah, I think we're good. That'll take care of it. Sorry, that was a long time. Should we tune this? Is it not working?
No, it is.
Oh, it is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, we can get started. So do you want to move?
Do I have to? Okay.
Hello. People can see you. Thank you very much, Eirene. That was fabulous. We have a few people watching online. We got it working.
Oh, nice.
Does anyone in the room have any questions? Solomon.
Thank you. Just going back to the heroine complex in the beginning. Do you think some of the practices and ideas about that were carried on by the early church and how they tell it seems very often.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm sure that when anytime you have a cultural evolution, you're not going to abandon everything, right? And you'll hold on to things that you think are helpful, but you're just applying them to a new maybe paradigm. And of course, like the saints and the heroine and the heroes aren't quite right famous for the same thing. So, but yeah, the idea that we're benefited by intermediaries, I think, that I do think. But I should say, like, I am an Orthodox Christian, so I'm not saying that we can, right, to suggest that they're not, valuable. So I just have to say that.
Can I ask, what's the significance of the lovely ankles? Two of them were described as having lovely ankles, which I'd never heard before. What's the significance of the ankles?
From what I've heard about that epithet, it is just maybe more of a general one. But maybe its ankles were like a small part of the body that could be seen. That could, I don't know if anyone else has any, but that's how it's been explained. Yeah, how I read it. I don't know if that helps at all.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Lynn and then Ricardo.
I was interested in what you were saying about, Andromache doing the first lament
Yeah,
for Hector and
yeah.
that sort of thing. And I've always been quite interested in the sequence there of the three women who lament.
Mm.
And I wondered, do you think it's possible to say that heroes survive, was what you were saying, because we sing about them
Mhm.
and we lament them,
Mhm.
and therefore how we remember them is dictated by who does the singing?
Oh, absolutely. I think that Homer's very sensitive to that,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah.
So actually the way in which we remember, I guess, the Trojan War is the way Helen grieves it, and the way that Laertes and her family life is remembered is the way Penelope
Mhm.
says it.
Mhm.
Grieving. Could you say that that really Hector's hero status is guaranteed to him by his wife,
Yes, absolutely. I would say that.
which
Yeah.
raises her more of a hero in a sense than he is?
I mean, I think the Greeks would say like they're equally, right? They're equally
Yeah.
heroic because they're both necessary. That's that social dimension, is you can't have one without the other.
Yeah.
So, but I would say,
Has she perhaps more power because she gets to dictate the terms?
we always want to
I
say
want
that.
to say that.
You can say that if you want, but you know what? I'm going to be really mean right now and point out that in Virgil, when Aeneas is like, where exactly is he? I forget now, but he runs into Helenus and Andromache opens her mouth because she wants to talk about Hector, and he's like, sorry, I don't have time right now. so it's really interesting. I always think about Hector and Andromache at that moment in the Union.
Yeah.
Aren't I mean? I'm picking on Lynn.
Just
Just
it's
so-
an interesting comparison, because if you're looking at Aeneas as taking the idea of a Homeric hero into the modern world, as it were, they actually in that moment it goes back to shutting women up, whereas they're much more
Yes. Whereas Homer's saying you can't yeah.
you can't have one without the other, but
Yeah.
Virgil's basically
And not only that, but like really the women are the ones that initiate the song, right?
yes, exactly. Thanks.
I took that to mean actually that he didn't want to hear about Hector. Like almost like perhaps there was something about he's the hero of this particular
Yes,
story. He didn't want
yes.
to hear about it.
This is my time now.
Yeah.
Rather than showing the woman, I had thought initially the opposite, but it could be both.
It could be. It can always be both.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's.
Ricardo.
Yeah, I have a bit of a technical question. The recognition scene.
Yeah.
You mentioned that it wasn't quite a recognition, right?
Right,
It
right.
moved all
Yeah.
along. So basically, I would imagine we couldn't call it an anagnosis, and then the usual tragedies, peripateia, things change at 180 degrees, right? So how would you call this let's say, pseudo anagnosis?
Oh, wow. That's a.
I'm over elaborating, but I was very curious.
I mean, that's it.
So we know each other who you are, but
Yeah.
we don't know, so let's pretend we're recognizing each other. I mean, how does it work?
Well, I mean, I think it is really important. It's really necessary because he needs to know that she has kept the secret, and she needs to know that he made the bed. So it's a confirmation, but it's not just like, it's not unimportant. So maybe we can keep it like it is the ultimate, like the fulfillment of the recognition. Let's put it that way. It's the telos. It's the telos of
It's
the
a confirmation, exactly
Yeah.
that, because they think each one thinks they know,
exactly.
but do they actually know? They don't. That's confirmed.
And it's very fun to read all of their interactions again when you have decided that they know she knows from the beginning, and then you read their interactions and it's really satisfying because you can see her almost toying with him, not in a cruel way, but in a sort of like at one point he says, I think your dream means that your husband's going to come home, and she says, oh well, dreams say all kinds of things, you can't really trust them. Right? So she's going to make him earn it, she's going to make him prove himself, and I think that's really fun. Yeah,
Could you see it then as an add-on instead? Maybe that might be-
absolutely.
If
Absolutely.
you don't want to see it that, if you want to read it that they know each other, then you could see it instead as a more modern add-on.
Yeah.
Something akin to.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we'll have to wait a year to see how Nolan depicts it in the film. I saw that trailer already. Can't wait.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
Naomi, are there any questions in the chat?
Not yet.
No. Okay, Katerina.
I just want to follow up what Lynn asked and just to make an observation. Just to say that the female role in lamenting being, being the ones that lament
Mhm.
in actual life is something that we do know that happened from representations from the late Bronze Age, from the late Mycenaean period, and from after the fall of the Mycenaean palaces as well. Although we didn't have many depictions between 1200 and 800 BC, nevertheless, we do have some during that dark period that do show females lamenting, and some of them are placed on cult objects that were deposited in graves at the cemetery of Perati. Is an example in Attica. Where we find vessels like that with figurines of lament, figures of lament. So what we see, in my opinion, the lament has also a ritual dimension.
Yes.
And this is clear from the representations and from the objects that were adorned like this. So what we see in Homer is something that was actually part of life and very important in ritual.
Yes.
The ramifications of that, I mean, that could be a whole lecture, so I don't want to, and I don't think I can improvise on that either, but I think that also should be, strengthens what you were saying about the role.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love it. I do. It is really incredible. The story, it's really like you feel like the story is being continued from that time, from that collapse of that civilization, and there's a sense. And there are centers. I mean, I'm also fascinated by the centers that never completely, the cult centers that never disappear. I'm not speaking coherently, but there are some places where the suggestion, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but the worship continued even through the collapse, like it never actually stopped being used. So I think that's also very telling, right? To me, that seems really.
Of course, it doesn't stop because the palaces collapsed. There were some changes in small ways, and the discussion about continuity in religion has been going on, and we don't talk about this anymore because it's a new point in the country. Because things evolve in the same way that the society changed, the cult changed and religion changed, but some things were carried through, but with modifications, and they had to adapt to the current circumstances of living, and the smaller communities, and not having an annex anymore, and so on and so forth. And heroines might evolve into deities from bedroom deities, and locally. So, but the power of the lament, I think, because it's just a human reaction to grief, and it can work as a relief. as presented as preservation of memory, and as the spark for what comes next, as the spark for the steps forward.
Yes.
As establishing one's Kleos, one's importance in the community, one's the social standing of the family. So it has a lot of power.
Yeah.
And of course, invoking powers and the passage to the underworld, and
All of it.
it
Yeah.
has a lot of ramifications. And its performance is always affected.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Just thinking about a lot of heroes. So a lot of them, there's this idea that they have a quality that goes too far.
Yeah.
Do you see that with heroines as well?
Yeah, I mean, I have a very complicated, so that's a really important question, because for sure, that's what I was trying to say about Andromache. Her grief is going to be excessive. It's going to be too much. And that is why it's going to be so enduring. So the too muchness, we put a value judgment on it, but I think they would understand that, yeah, sometimes you have to go too far. Like, now, I also think about the Odyssey differently than I do about the Iliad, right? For me, the Iliad feels like a story set in the mythic age. The Odyssey, I feel, straddles the mythic and the post-heroic, right? It's a myth, but like there's so many little gestures about a ritual. And one of those is exactly what your question is asking, which is everything is balanced in the end, right? It ends very similarly to how Aeschylus's Eumenides ends, where Athena comes down and says, now everybody's going to be at peace, and you're not going to fight anymore, and everything's going to be great. So just forget it all. We're having perfect balance now. And so for me, like that epic, the Odyssey ends sort of in the age of cult, as it were, right? In the age where we're going to use ritual to balance things. Now, of course, nothing really does ever balance, right? I mean, you end up with endless wars. But the idea is, at least in the ritual moment, everything is perfect in that one moment, which we cannot carry on past that moment. But yeah, I don't know if that answers, though.
Or is it that the quality of the female figure going too far is slightly different to the quality of the male figure? So Hector goes out and kills himself, which is pretty catastrophic, which is not what his wife wants, but she doesn't do anything other than grieve and lament, which is the sort of opposite thing that together complement each other as hero heroine. I don't know, that's just how I see that balancing itself, and it's part of us as humanity, The ones who go too far, the other do the opposite. It goes too far, you come somewhere. I think it's what you're trying to say, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
The world resolving itself.
Yeah.
For a moment in time.
Yeah, and
remembering.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And I will say, like, exactly to your point, a lot of the arguments about heroines is that they are a different category, right? That's Lyons' argument, Deborah Lyons, in Gender and Immortality. She basically says the heroine is a different category. Now, people will debate her, but of course, everything is debatable, it's just what you. But I think I think that is the whole idea, and it doesn't seem to us that Andromache and Hector balance each other out, but they do, because exactly as you said, he destroys himself, but she doesn't let him be forgotten. So he's destroyed physically, but he's remembered eternally. So yeah. So yeah.
Do you think like the heroine status kind of requires like a loss of like typical femininity in her? Because I think it's the bit where, like, upon hearing of Hector's death, like Andromache like drops the shuttle, so she drops like the typical tool of like weaving like the story, or like her, like it's kind of emblematic of femininity, in order to like be so consumed by her excessive grief, and then it's like the indulgence in the excess that allows her to kind of take on like the heroine status of like her tears being like metonymic of like the fall of Troy, the fall of her husband, and then the loss in Hector of her status as a woman, so she kind of transcends it to become the heroine.
That's so interesting. I would put it maybe slightly differently, and I would say that dropping the shuttle, like maybe represents the interruption of the story, right? Like the end of the story, and the tearing off of the headdress, and these are all like features of lament that become ritualized, right, Katerina? I mean, lament is incorporated in ritual. So I actually think it is probably is typically feminine, but you're absolutely on point that this is a very significant moment when she drops the shuttle, when she tears off her headdress, right? There's it's indicating to us exactly as you say, the fall of Troy, right? That this civilization is going to end, but that grief will keep the memory of it. So it won't ever really die fully. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, Naomi? Was there anything in the chat? Nothing in the chat. Okay.
Oh, those who are watching, hello, thank you. Sorry, I'm hiding from you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Eirene, and thank you for answering those questions, and thank you for asking the questions.
Thank
This
you, Helen.
afternoon now, if you're interested, some of us are going to the pavilion, which is out the front of Queen's and across the road. Follow me, that's where I'm going, for a drink. And then if you're joining us for dinner,